I want you to imagine being 17 years old, standing in a crowded room, music loud enough that you can feel it in your chest, surrounded by people you've known for years. Imagine finally working up the courage to say something you've been holding inside for almost 2 years, knowing that once the words leave your mouth, there's no taking them back. That was me. Nervous. Hopeful. Completely unprepared for what was about to happen. I liked Nico for almost 2 years before I ever said anything. Not casually. Not quietly. I liked him in that slow, consuming way where you replay conversations in your head and convince yourself every smile means something. We were in the same friend group all through junior and senior year of high school. He was always at the center of things, always laughing, always surrounded by people. And somehow, when he talked to me, it felt like the noise faded away. He had this way of making everyone feel important. When he remembered small details about my life, I told myself it wasn't accidental. When he joked with me differently than he joked with others, I read into it. When he started texting me more often, checking in, asking about my day, asking if I wanted to hang out just the two of us, I convinced myself it meant something more. I was 17 and inexperienced, and I trusted my feelings more than my logic. The summer after graduation felt like the right time. Everyone was in that strange in-between phase, no longer in high school but not quite in college yet. We were at a party, one of those typical end-of-summer gatherings where everyone was celebrating freedom and pretending they weren't terrified of the future. The house was packed. Music was blasting. People were laughing, drinking, shouting over each other. My heart was pounding the entire night because I knew what I wanted to do. I pulled Nico aside, away from the noise, away from the crowd. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together. My voice felt like it didn't belong to me. I told him I'd liked him for a long time. I told him I wanted to know if he felt the same way. I remember barely being able to breathe as I waited for his response, bracing myself for rejection but still hoping. He smiled. Not awkwardly, not nervously. He smiled like he'd been expecting this. He told me he liked me too. Said he had for months. Said he didn't want to ruin our friendship by making the first move. Said he was glad I'd been brave enough to say something first. Every word landed perfectly, like it had been rehearsed just for me. In that moment, I felt lighter than I ever had before. Then he asked if he could kiss me. I said yes without hesitation. It was my first kiss. For a brief moment, everything felt unreal in the best way possible. The noise around us faded. My head spun. I thought this was the beginning of something I dreamed about for years. And then I heard laughter. At first, I didn't understand what I was hearing. It didn't register immediately. Then it got louder, clearer. I turned my head and saw his friends standing at the back door, watching us. One of them was bent over, laughing so hard he could barely stand. Another was clapping slowly, mockingly. My stomach dropped in a way I didn't know was possible. Nico pulled away from me. The look on his face changed completely. That smile I just trusted turned into something cold and amused. He turned toward his friends and said, "I told you she'd fall for it." And just like that, everything shattered. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. It was a bet. A dare. A game they'd planned together. Someone had dared Nico to get me to confess my feelings, pretend to like me back, kiss me, and let everyone watch. I wasn't a person to them. I was a punchline. I don't remember leaving the party. That entire part of the night feels like a blur. The next clear memory I have is sitting in my car, crying so hard I couldn't see the road. I pulled into a random parking lot and just sat there for almost an hour, shaking, trying to breathe, trying to understand how something I'd hoped for so deeply turned into the most humiliating moment of my life. That night didn't end when the party ended. The story spread through our entire friend group within days. People whispered about it, laughed about it. Some even joked about it to my face. I stopped going out. I stopped answering messages. I spent the rest of that summer hiding in my room, replaying everything over and over again, wondering how I could have been so stupid, and whether I'd ever trust anyone again. When summer finally ended, and it was time to leave for college, I packed my bags with a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear because I didn't know who I was going to be without the version of myself that existed in high school. Relief because distance felt like the only way to survive. I was going to a university 4 hours away, far enough that no one there would know what happened, far enough that the whispers and laughter couldn't follow me. The drive to campus was quiet. I remember staring out the window, watching familiar places disappear, and unfamiliar ones take their place, thinking about how easy it would be to completely disappear into this new life. No one here knew I was the girl who got humiliated at a party. No one here knew my name or my past. For the first time in months, that anonymity felt like freedom. The first few weeks were harder than I expected. Even though no one knew my story, I carried it with me everywhere. I was quieter than I wanted to be, second-guessing every interaction, wondering if people were laughing at me the same way Nico's friends had. Every time someone smiled at me or showed interest, my brain searched for hidden meanings, waiting for the punchline that never came. Slowly, though, things began to change. I forced myself to say yes to things even when my instinct was to stay in my dorm room. I joined clubs, not because I was passionate about all of them, but because I wanted to feel connected to something again. I introduced myself to people, instead of waiting to be noticed. Each small step felt terrifying, but it also felt necessary. I started focusing more on my classes. Studying became a kind of refuge, something I could control when everything else felt uncertain. I took pride in my grades, in understanding material, in proving to myself that I was capable and disciplined. Academic success didn't erase what happened to me, but it gave me something solid to hold on to when my confidence wavered. I also started taking care of myself in ways I never had before. I began working out, not to change my body for anyone else, but to feel strong again. Feeling my muscles ache after a workout reminded me that I was alive, that my body belonged to me, not to a memory someone else had turned into a joke. I learned how to dress in ways that made me feel comfortable and confident instead of invisible. There were still bad days, nights when I lay in bed replaying that party over and over, wondering how I could have misread everything so badly. Moments when I questioned whether I was too naive, too trusting, too easy to fool. But slowly, those thoughts stopped defining me. They became quieter, less powerful. By my second year, I wasn't just surviving college anymore. I was living it. I had friends who genuinely cared about me, who laughed with me instead of at me. I had routines, favorite places on campus, inside jokes, study sessions that turned into late-night conversations. I started to feel like a real person again, not just someone recovering from embarrassment. I dated a little. Nothing serious. Just enough to remind myself that someone could be interested in me without cruelty attached to it. Each experience taught me something important, not about them but about myself. I learned what I liked, what I didn't, what I deserved, and what I would never tolerate again. By junior year, the transformation felt complete. I wasn't the quiet girl fading into the background anymore. I walked into rooms with my head up. I spoke without apologizing for taking up space. I trusted my instincts more than my fears. High school felt like a distant chapter, something that had shaped me but no longer controlled me. I barely thought about Nico anymore. His name didn't make my stomach drop. His face didn't haunt my thoughts. He was just someone I used to know, someone from a different life. I honestly believed that chapter was closed. And then, without warning, he showed up again. I didn't expect to see Nico again. Not there. Not in that place. When I first noticed him, it was almost surreal, like my brain was playing a trick on me. I was sitting in a campus coffee shop during the first week of the fall semester, half focused on my notes, half listening to the noise around me, when I felt that strange sensation of being watched. I looked up, and there he was. He recognized me immediately. I could tell by the way his eyes widened just slightly, the way his posture changed. For a moment, he just stared, like he was trying to reconcile the person he remembered with the person sitting in front of him now. Then his expression shifted. Recognition, confusion, and something else I hadn't seen on his face before. Interest. He walked over like this was the most natural thing in the world. Like we were old friends who'd simply lost touch. He said my name, smiled, and told me he almost didn't recognize me. Said I looked amazing. Said it was crazy running into me here after all this time. He spoke casually, confidently, like there was no weight to our history at all. I smiled back, polite but distant. I kept the conversation short, told him it was nice to see him. Said I had to get to class. When he asked for my number, I declined. When he suggested we hang out sometime, I brushed it off. I walked away and left him standing there, looking confused in a way that felt strangely satisfying. Not because I wanted revenge, but because for the first time I wasn't the one reaching for him. After that, he started appearing everywhere. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. A campus is a big place, but routines overlap. Still, it was hard to ignore how often I ran into him. One morning, I walked into the second-floor study area of the library, where I always worked between classes, and there he was, sitting a few rows back. He looked up from his laptop, caught my eye, and waved. I nodded, and chose a seat on the opposite side of the room. The next day, I stopped by the campus coffee shop at my usual time, 2:30 in the afternoon, right before my 3 o'clock lecture. Nico was in line ahead of me. When I walked in, he turned around and smiled like seeing me was the highlight of his day. He asked what I was ordering, then insisted on paying. I thanked him, took the drink, and put my earbuds in while he tried to sit down and talk. The message was clear, even if the words weren't. By Thursday, he showed up at the weekly meeting for the environmental club I'd joined sophomore year. He walked in late, scanned the room, and took the empty chair directly across from me. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, wondering when he'd suddenly developed an interest in environmental issues. During the break, Leilani leaned over and whispered that this was getting weird. I told her I could handle it. Friday morning, I saw him at the campus gym during my usual workout time. He wasn't even exercising properly, just walking slowly on a treadmill, watching me through the mirror while I did squats. The realization made my skin crawl. I finished my set early, grabbed my water bottle, and left before he could approach me. That weekend, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Nico. He said he'd gotten my number from someone in our old friend group and hoped that was okay. He suggested grabbing coffee sometime. Said it would be nice to catch up properly now that we were at the same school. I stared at the message for a long time, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely. Another part was curious. Not about him, but about whether he would finally acknowledge what he'd done. I responded hours later with a simple sure. We made plans to meet Monday morning at a cafe on the south end of campus. When Monday came, I almost didn't go. I stood outside the cafe for several minutes, debating whether to turn around and walk away. In the end, I went in. Not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted to see the truth for myself. He was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 drinks. He stood up when he saw me and smiled that familiar charming smile. He told me he remembered I liked vanilla lattes. I thanked him and sat down, feeling strangely detached, like I was watching the interaction from the outside. He talked almost non-stop, about his classes, his apartment, how different college was from what he expected. He asked about my major and seemed impressed by my research project. He complimented my hair, my style, the way I carried myself. He mentioned a party coming up and suggested we should go together. I kept my responses polite and brief. I declined the invitation. I didn't ask many questions. I watched him try harder with each passing minute, switching topics, adjusting his tone, searching for the version of me who used to hang on to his every word. And through all of it, he never once mentioned high school. Never mentioned the party. Never apologized. He acted like our last interaction had been a normal goodbye before heading to different colleges. After nearly an hour, he leaned forward and said he'd been thinking about me a lot since seeing me again. He wondered what might have happened if we'd stayed in touch. He said he'd love to spend more time together now, maybe make up for lost time. I smiled, checked my phone, and said I had to get to class. When he asked for my schedule, I told him I'd text him sometime. I walked out of that cafe knowing everything I needed to know. When I got back to my apartment after the coffee with Nico, Leilani was already there. She'd finished classes early and had made tea, the kind of quiet gesture that told me she knew something was up without even asking. The moment I sat down, she looked at my face and said, "So?" I told her exactly how it went. How Nico talked for almost an hour without once acknowledging what he did. How he complimented me, suggested plans, and acted like the past was just an inconvenient gap in our friendship. Leilani shook her head and said what I was already thinking. If he couldn't even name what he'd done, then he hadn't really changed. The texts started the next day. At first, they were harmless. A meme about a class we apparently both had. A comment about the weather. A casual question about homework. I answered hours later with short neutral responses. I wasn't rude, but I wasn't inviting anything either. Over the next few days, the messages came more often. Invitations to campus events. Suggestions to grab coffee again. Little check-ins disguised as friendliness. I could feel his frustration growing as my replies stayed polite but distant. He started showing up in person more too. I'd see him at the library during my usual study hours, always sitting close enough to notice me, far enough to claim coincidence. I'd spot him at the student center between classes, lingering like he was waiting for me to approach. Every time, I stayed calm. I nodded, said hi if it felt unavoidable, and kept moving. I wasn't angry. I wasn't scared. I was simply unavailable in every way that mattered. Saturday night, Leilani dragged me to a party off campus. I hadn't planned on going, but she insisted I needed a break from studying and overthinking. The house was packed, music loud, people spilling into every room. I was in the kitchen getting a drink when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned around and found myself face to face with Johnny, one of Nico's closest friends from high school. One of the guys who had been there that night, laughing. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. Johnny asked if he could talk for a minute. We moved to a quieter corner of the living room. He apologized. Not vaguely, not defensively. He said he was an immature jerk back then, and that what they did was cruel. I could see genuine guilt on his face. I told him I appreciated the apology and that I'd moved on. We talked for a while about college, about how much life had changed. When he left, he said something that stuck with me. He mentioned Nico talked about me constantly now, trying to figure out why I was being so distant. Like he couldn't understand that his past actions had consequences. Not long after that, Rocco entered my life. We met through a shared study group, started talking more, and slowly fell into an easy rhythm. Nothing intense. Nothing dramatic. Just comfortable. He listened when I talked. He didn't push. He treated me like I mattered without making me question his intentions. Being around him felt calm in a way I hadn't realized I needed. I noticed Nico's behavior change when he saw me with Rocco. One afternoon we were talking outside after class, laughing about an upcoming exam, when Nico walked across the quad and spotted us. His smile faltered for just a second. Something that looked like jealousy flashed across his face before he masked it. That evening, he texted asking if I wanted to study together. When I said I already had plans, he asked directly if Rocco and I were dating. I told him we were seeing each other casually. The typing bubbles appeared and disappeared several times before his reply finally came. He said that was cool and hoped I was happy. A few days later, Nico invited me to a small gathering at his apartment. He mentioned mutual friends from high school would be there. I almost said no automatically, but then he mentioned Faye would be coming. I'd run into her recently and actually enjoyed talking to her. So I agreed to stop by for a bit. When I arrived, Nico greeted me like he'd been waiting all night. He hovered, tried to guide me into conversations, touched my arm casually as if testing boundaries. Each time, I moved away smoothly and redirected my attention elsewhere. Later that night, Faye and I stepped out onto the balcony. She asked me directly if being around Nico bothered me. I appreciated her honesty. I told her the truth, that I wasn't the same person I was in high school and he didn't have power over me anymore. When we went back inside, I noticed Nico watching us, trying to read something into it that wasn't there. Eventually, Nico asked to talk to me alone. We stepped back onto the balcony. He said he wanted to clear the air about that party senior year. He minimized it. Called it a weird moment. Blamed alcohol and immature friends. Never actually said he was sorry. I listened quietly. When he finished, I told him calmly that I'd moved on and hoped he had too. When he leaned forward, like he might hug me, I stepped back and suggested we rejoin everyone inside. The texts intensified after that night. Good morning messages. Good night messages. Random thoughts throughout the day. I responded less and less. He started showing up everywhere again. The gym, the library, the student center. Leilani noticed immediately. She told me he was clearly pursuing me hard. I told her I wasn't interested in making a scene. I just wanted him to understand without me having to spell it out. Then the environmental club announced a weekend camping trip. I signed up without thinking much of it. The next day, Nico texted saying he'd signed up too and suggested we carpool. I told him I was already riding with friends. I could practically feel the disappointment through the screen. I didn't realize it then, but that camping trip would be the moment everything finally shifted. The camping trip took place the second weekend of October. Leilani and I drove up with two other girls from the club, the car packed with sleeping bags, coolers, and food we'd probably overpacked. The drive itself felt light and normal, the kind of road trip where music plays and conversations drift between jokes and serious thoughts. I didn't think much about Nico on the way up. I didn't want to give him that space in my head anymore. The campsite was beautiful. Tall pine trees surrounded the area, and a clear stream ran nearby, the sound of water constant and calming. About 20 people from the club showed up. Tents went up, firewood was gathered, and for a while everything felt uncomplicated. Nico tried to insert himself into whatever I was doing, offering help with camp stoves, suggesting we gather firewood together. And each time I included other people so it never became just the two of us. I wasn't avoiding him dramatically. I was just not giving him what he wanted. Saturday morning, we went on a long hike to a waterfall. Nico positioned himself right behind me on the trail, trying to make small talk about classes and random memories from high school. I responded politely but kept shifting my attention to the people around us. When the trail widened, I walked beside Rocco, laughing at his stories, feeling grounded and present. I could sense Nico watching from behind, but I didn't turn around. That night, everyone gathered around a large campfire. The flames flickered against the dark, casting moving shadows across faces. Someone brought marshmallows and chocolate, and soon people were making s'mores and laughing. When someone suggested truth or dare, the energy shifted. It felt like one of those moments where you could sense something coming before it happened. When it was Nico's turn, he chose truth. Someone asked if he had a crush on anyone there. He looked straight at me and said yes. He said there was someone he really liked, but wasn't sure how she felt. The silence around the fire was heavy. Eyes moved between us. I didn't react. I took a sip of my drink and stayed quiet. Not long after, I walked away from the fire to get water from the coolers near the cars. The night air was cold and clear, stars visible through the trees. I was digging through the ice when I heard footsteps behind me. Nico said my name softly. He told me he was talking about me during the game. He said he'd really fallen for who I was now and wanted to take me on a real date. I closed the cooler and stood up straight. I thanked him for being honest and told him I needed time to think. I wasn't encouraging him, but I wasn't cruel either. We walked back separately. I didn't give him an answer that night. The following week, Nico texted asking if I'd thought about it. I delayed responding and told him I'd been busy with midterms. When Leilani asked what I was going to do, I realized something important as I said it out loud. I didn't actually need closure. I didn't need a dramatic confrontation. I just needed to keep choosing the life I'd already built. At another party later that month, Nico asked me directly if there was ever going to be a chance. I told him the truth. I said I had forgiven him, but forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or pretending it didn't matter. I explained that I'd built a whole new life, and I wasn't interested in bringing someone into it who reminded me of the worst moment of my old one. For the first time, he really seemed to hear me. After that, the texts stopped. He stopped showing up everywhere. He gave me space, and slowly, something unexpected happened. I stopped thinking about him altogether. Not out of effort, not out of anger, just naturally. He became irrelevant. Rocco and I grew closer. Our relationship felt steady and honest in a way nothing ever had before. He valued me without needing to lose me first. Being with him felt safe, easy, and real. When he told me he loved me, I knew I felt the same way. Months later, I ran into Nico again. He was different, quieter, more grounded. He apologized properly this time. No excuses, no minimizing. I accepted it without emotion because the wound was already healed. We wished each other well and went our separate ways. What stayed with me wasn't revenge. It wasn't satisfaction. It was indifference. Nico no longer mattered to my emotional world. And that, I realized, was the real victory. I wasn't the girl who cried alone in her car anymore. I was someone who knew her worth and refused to give access to people who treated her feelings like a joke. I learned that sometimes the strongest response isn't anger or confrontation. It's living well and letting someone fade into the background of a life you're proud of. And that was something no one could ever take away from me.